And so touch also increases a mother's relaxation hormones and aids in the release of oxytocin. So that research even alone tells us that we have, through the actual act of touching, we can receive nurturing, receive calm, translate assurance, and also release hormones within our body when it's in a safe situation. That oxytocin actually helps us to relax and it's also in alignment with other hormones which create a peace of mind and safety. And so it's pretty important. So research has uncovered an astonishing number of poor health outcomes that result when we are deprived of touch. The correlation between anxiety, depression, and stress and touch is a large, and it's a large issue that's actually been studied quite frequently. It has been found that touch calms our nervous center and slows down our heartbeat. Human touch also lowers blood pressure, as well as cortisol, our stress hormone. It also triggers the release of oxytocin, which I just said, a hormone known for promoting emotional bonding to others. I didn't say that, because the oxytocin also allows for the connection between us, and so that's an important hormone to create. And we are currently, we have a heightened state globally of instability. Would you guys agree with that? What do you think about that? What do you think generally it is the attitude of people when they perceive things changing that they've never seen before or that they're fearful of? What do you know, how do you feel amongst your peers and yourself about what's happening right now? Anybody want to share?
Stress.
It's stressful when we don't know what to expect. I was talking to my husband the other day, and we had all these plans for how to navigate retirement, and the things that used to work, we can't. It doesn't work. It's not safe to do. Does that make sense? Financially, it's not a sure thing. Financially, and so what happens when people financially don't feel secure?
It's an anxiousness concern.
It is, and it's an anxiousness. And because we have multiple things going on, I think all of us are probably feeling a little more anxiety than, it's just because it's not so much that we feel threatened all the time, it's that I don't know how to navigate this new scenario. I've never seen this before, I'm not quite sure how to do this. You know, one group is saying this, there's a lot of divisiveness, you know, there's a lot of one believing this way, one believing that, a lot of pitting and separating between each other. And the only reason why I'm saying that is that our awareness of some of these things, such as how we can create safety and how we can use touch to our benefit, is helpful. Okay, so when we're talking about stress, it was kind of interesting because there was a study done with Harlow's monkeys. I don't know how it was done in the 60s, and they this researcher, he dressed up this wire mother for the monkeys, and one of them was holding food and one of them was soft and cuddly, and they noted that the ones that the infants, the smaller little monkeys, actually went to the ones that were soft and cuddly more than to the food. That's really interesting to me. And so yes,
I was just thinking about a study done in Czechoslovakia at an orphanage with babies and small children.
Right.
And they were holding and touching some babies.
Right.
Some were just lying and not moving or showing any form of information, but they found once they started touching the babies and picking them up and holding them, they actually progressed extremely fast.
Yeah, and they had a lot of, if I'm remembering that study, they had a lot of deaths, infant deaths, because they didn't get enough physical interaction. So that's probably why they say, hey, this is a primal need. It's a need, not just, it's nice to be touched. It's an actual need between human beings. But I guess we need to know, and what I'm hoping that we'll know is how to navigate that better, because it's not universal that everyone wants to be touched based on the responses of me touching you when I handed you a treat. Hey, you guys should have been thrilled. Not always. And so it was perfect. You proved a point that it's not always okay. It's not always comfortable. So here's another really interesting study that they did. They did a PET scan. They hooked somebody up to a PET scan and who was in the hospital to see what the emotional responses would be to hand holding. Okay, and what the results showed is that those people that had their hand held by someone they knew actually responded more favorably, but they still responded by someone they didn't know more favorably, and they had more favorable medical outcomes. So how important is the work that you do? It's a pretty big question, because a lot of you do hard things, for people, a lot of hard things, but you have the capacity to really make a huge difference by your willingness to touch. Okay, let's see if I put the wrong paper down here. I love the fact that we have so much more research that talks about, you can come sit down if you like, oh, okay. That helps us to understand the human response better, so that we can use it to help us identify how to love better as human beings. Okay, so what do you think happened during the pandemic? What happened with your people during the pandemic? Anybody want to share? Were you guys able to go out still?
Yeah.
Okay. And were your people able to go out? Okay. And did you notice anything that happened because your people couldn't go out? They lost some contact with others.
Depression set in.
Hugely. We had a huge amount of depression. So I'll give you my bird's eye view, since we have patients in the home, in facilities, and also a few in like nursing care situations. And the feedback, and also in our caregiver support groups, we heard people that were caring for people and how their loved ones declined so rapidly. Okay, there was a massive loss to those elderly people that lost contact with their loved ones. It was horrible. It was horrible. It created just really, really bad health outcomes when they lost the ability. They no longer had the choice to connect with their loved ones. And it only slightly improved when they finally realized they could Zoom with their loved ones. It only slightly improved. So they were able to improve outcomes, just slightly, with the fact that their loved one could actually interact at, to some degree. But it was a really harsh thing. And even in the assisted livings, they were really, they really limited who could be seen, and the atmosphere. And then they couldn't bring in their activities people, and they couldn't bring in, other stimulating factors. And it was so hard. It was so hard on people. It was hard on both the caregiver and the one being cared for. So we know that the less connection we have with people, the worse their medical outcomes. They've actually been able to prove that in multiple scenarios. So, but as you saw, sometimes touch isn't always wanted. But if it is, what are some creative ways that we can increase our connection with each other? Yes.
Well, I'd like to first suggest that when you meet somebody for the first time, instead of touching them,
Mm-hmm.
if you're really, just be very warm with your verbal cues and maybe indicate with your hands that you would like to touch, but wait until they know who you are, they recognize you, they know you're a nice person, they're no longer kind of like, you're a new person.
Yeah. So build some trust.
Yeah, before you initiate the touch, because then, I mean, even the ones that raise their hand, I'm sure once they know you and you are a friend, then the touching is more acceptable.
Yeah. They found that pets can also facilitate touching, right? We all have heard that. I've got a therapy dog at home, and it makes a big difference. He's a great dog. He's a great therapy dog. And so pets can do that. And when I was thinking, okay, how can we increase that? Besides, I love this permission part because we're going to touch on that a little bit more. But they know that weighted blankets sometimes help. Have you heard that a weighted blanket sometimes can help, especially with dementia or Alzheimer's patients. And services like massage, pedicure, or where there's actual interaction, where you're servicing, doing their hair or whatever. Those are all touch points. They're all touch points, and so maybe the person's not, particularly a huggy personality type, but they may let you comb their hair or, something like that. And so those are kind of some of the other ways that we can incorporate touch in a meaningful way for people. So you talked about having permission or gaining trust. But here's just a little bit of information. I thought, okay, what can I give you that maybe you haven't heard before? Because you, being caregivers, you probably have heard, at least pieces of this before. But there is such a thing as a fear of being touched, and it's clinically called haphophobia. So has anybody ever heard of that? Haphophobia. So it's HAPHEPHOBIA. Haphophobia. So it's an anxiety disorder characterized by a fear of being touched. Other names for haphophobia include chiropractophobia and phensophobia. And I actually had to look these up to know how to pronounce them, and thixophobia. So there are that many different names for a fear of being touched. Does that surprise you? Because it surprised me when I looked it up. No, okay. Well, I was kind of surprised that they have found it so often and in so many different scenarios that they have specific names for them. And so the symptoms of this, just for information purposes, is it creates immediate fear or anxiety, panic attacks, avoidance, which would be a cue that you talked about, general anxiety, depression, and a low quality of life where people tend to isolate, and because that fear of being touched or having that kind of interaction is really uncomfortable. And so and they broke it down into children, just for your information, in case this is applicable for you sometimes. Usually crying, freezing in position, temper tantrums, and clinging to their caregiver. So you know how sometimes grandparents go in for oh, give me a kill, and you see the kid retract. Not necessarily is it a phobia, anxiety disorder. But again, sometimes we have to build the trust, there has to be a trust situation. And some of the things that can create or be the underlying cause is fear of germs, fear of crowds, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. All of those things are on the underlining of why somebody may choose not to be touched. So I just thought that may be a little bit helpful, that you can kind of understand, okay, what to look for, and I'm sure as caregivers you learn, because particular as a mother, I know, I learned it when your children don't communicate, you have to learn body cues, right? And so you learn to read those body cues, and dads too, they're caregivers also, and we learn to read those body cues, and that, as long as we've got that in mind, that we're always kind of paying attention to how people are reacting to us and with us and for us. Sometimes, have you ever noted that, one person can get them to do something and the other person can't? Oftentimes a family member cannot get them in the shower, but they can, And so what is it about that? Sometimes it's the dynamic of the relationship, it could be multiple things. So since I'm in hospice, I'm going to kind of conclude on this last part. So in end-of-life issues, when there's touching, most people have different perceptions on how end-of-life should go. So what do you think is the most supportive thing to do for somebody who is actively dying?
Well, it probably varies, but I had someone, they weren't able to be communicated with, but they were moving around, and I had learned through their experience that holding somebody's feet and wrapping them and holding them makes them feel safe. So I did that, and he was able to calm down and quit throwing up all the stuff, and just kind of tried to send positive, messages, I don't know, on a spiritual energy level or something, and just wrapped the feet, kind of held them.
Yeah,
and had that
babies like
connection.
that. They like to be wrapped tight too, don't they? Don't they? So yes.
I found that they like just having their face washed, or their hands,
I
just
love
putting
that.
cream on their hands and just rubbing their feet, and just making them feel comfortable. Sometimes a hot water bottle they enjoy, just
Yes.
holding
Anything that
that
brings
on
comfort.
their
Okay.
tummy. But also, when you're washing someone, I found that always I make sure that they're covered all the time.
Right.
When I have to give a full wash, I still make sure that there's never a part of them that's uncovered, and I just wash a part and I cover it up straight away. So that makes them feel
good.
they keep their dignity, and they
Yes.
feel.
And I think preserving dignity is a huge thing. But you made a good point, keeping them covered. How many of you have cared for somebody who throws their covers off all the time?
Yeah, well, that was that gentleman I was talking
Yes.
about, and so
Throws those covers off all the time. And so what I wanted to share with you is that there is, in the dying process, that most of the time we would think that a person would want to have their hand held or would want touching. Sometimes people, especially if they're very connected and having a difficult time transitioning, touch actually anchors them back to this life, and it makes it difficult for them to make the transition. And so that's why sometimes you see they wait until everyone's gone before they die, or there's all different kinds of scenarios. So the bottom line is to know that it could be that when we're dealing with people as caregivers, it's never just a general, this is the way it is, right? Or how I'd like to be comforted is how they would like to be comforted.
Right.
We have to know them, don't we? We have to know that they like their face washed, or we have to kind of know them and offer what would be comforting to them, maybe more than what would be comforting to us. And you probably have all learned that, but you would be so surprised on how many people didn't even consider the fact that maybe not everybody feels comforted that way, yes.
Many years ago, we took the young women into a nursing home with the idea that we had some lotion and we just were asking
Mhm.
people, can we give you,
Mhm.
can we put lotion on your hands? Can we just give you a hand massage?
Mhm.
And we didn't get very many takers.
Interesting, huh? Interesting. Another thing that I have noted in years of working with is a lot of times how comfortable we feel about doing that. Also, that is translated to the person that may be receiving that. So we have to be really comfortable with whatever they're okay with, generally in order to translate that message first. Okay, because if we're doing it and we're like, I don't know if they're gonna want this, or I may be ready, then they're gonna sense discomfort, and then they're less likely to say, yeah, sure, I'd like that. Yeah. So that's another thing. There's a lot of communication that goes between us as caregivers and as friends and people that is very nonverbal, and we're picking up messages all of the time. And so how we approach people, or the tone of our voice, all of those things have been mentioned in this class, and so that's excellent. It sounds like you guys have a great grasp on that. Yes.
Also, as caregivers, we're caregivers, and when you go into a hospice situation, the family's there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's oftentimes helping the family understand, yes, touch, no touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, cover them, no cover them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, leave them alone
Yes.
as much. And then not to override our step of the family being there.
It's a fabulous balance, isn't it? I love that. It really is, because you want to honor the family, you want to, and you're playing advocate across the board, to make sure that everyone's having the most positive experience. But I appreciate the fact that you have in-services, that you have an opportunity to maybe even talk about it or learn new skills, because really you do play a pivotal role in people's lives. And I believe that when people are in need, they're the most vulnerable. And when people have needs and families have needs, that's when they're the most vulnerable. And so our opportunities to make a difference really make a difference. And I hope that you realize that. Any other questions? Perfect. Thank you so much for letting me come.